Welcome to the Urban Herald. We're the team that provides the deep contextual analysis you need to be truly well-informed. And today we are taking on a global icon, an artist whose image is absolutely everywhere, and yet she's almost completely misunderstood.
Indeed. And we're framing this deep dive as something of an uncomfortable invitation for you. We want to move way past the posters, the keychains, the social media filters, all of that.
The Funko Pops.
Funko Pops, absolutely. We're moving past the romanticized biographies to really explore the true, the radical, and frankly, the often excruciatingly painful life and work of Frida Kahlo.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is the central mission today. This massive, almost unbridgeable gap between the global icon and the actual living, breathing artist. I mean, for most people who encounter Frida Kahlo today, her image, the unmistakable unibrow, the severe hair, the vibrant floral crown, appears on a tote bag or a coffee mug long before they ever see one of her actual canvases.
And that's the defining paradox of her legacy, isn't it? Her visual identity, her whole aesthetic, has reached this level of global ubiquity that's usually reserved for, a mega brand like Coca-Cola.
Yeah, exactly.
But the sheer depth of her art, the unwavering commitment to her politics, and the really radical nature of her identity, it all just remains obscure to the millions who consume her likeness.
So our job today, as we see it, is to cut through that noise, to move beyond that convenient, marketable story of this strong woman who overcame pain.
Right.
We're going to look at her art as a project of ruthless self-analysis, a searing political commentary on gender, disability, the body, post-revolutionary Mexico. And we have to do it through this heavy, ironic lens of her current status as a hyper-luxury commodity.
We really do. We need to define the phenomenon which we're calling Fridamania, because this process is one of profound cultural sanitization. It's successfully depoliticized a disabled, lifelong communist Mexican artist who, and this is so important, created small, intimate works.
Right, they weren't meant for billboards.
Not at all. They were for close, private viewing. And her challenging, often bloody identity has been smoothed out, completely sanitized for mass consumption.
And if you look at what gets chosen for the merchandise, it's the flowers, the jewelry, the shade of lipstick, the unibrow. They're all aesthetic choices that completely ignore the foundational realities of her life.
Precisely, because what the commerce deliberately cuts out are her most radical, her most confronting aspects. Her unwavering dedication to communism, her chronic physical suffering that went on for 3 decades, and her unflinching willingness to paint subjects that society still censors.
Absolutely. We're talking about explicit depictions of miscarriage, abortion, emotional agony, non-conforming female sexuality.
All of it. The commerce, it basically takes the face of the pain, but it discards the political and the physical reasons for it.
So, to understand where all of this started, why she even became a self-portraitist, we have to begin at the moment her life was just violently fractured. Her body was irrevocably changed when she was just 18 years old, back in 1925, by a catastrophic traffic accident. And this wasn't just a footnote in her biography. This was the genesis of her entire artistic vocation.
The physical damage was horrific, and it defined the rest of her life right up until her death in 1954. She had multiple spinal fractures, a pulverized foot, a dislocated shoulder, and, most devastatingly, a shattered pelvis.
And she described it in such a visceral way.
He did. We have to use her own words here. She described the moment an iron handrail from the bus impaled her pelvis. She said it pierced her, the way a sword pierces a bull.
That one description, it just encapsulates the trauma. It wasn't an injury, it was an act of extreme violence that left her in a full-body plaster cast, confined to bed for months, often totally isolated, completely dependent on other people for care.
And this profound trauma, this confinement, it literally necessitated her art. She couldn't move. She couldn't go to her classes. So her parents came up with a solution. They had a special lap easel made for her. And crucially, they installed an overhead mirror on the canopy of her 4-poster bed.
Which is just fascinating when you think about it. Her turn to self-portraiture wasn't this conscious aesthetic decision rooted in vanity. It was a strategic response to utter confinement. She had only one subject available to her.
Exactly. And she was forced to study it in minute forensic detail. When your body is functionally a prison, constrained by plaster and pain, the mirror stops being a tool for, self-adornment.
Right.
It becomes a window. But more than that, it becomes a laboratory for studying identity within ruins. She had to transform her bedroom into her studio out of sheer physical necessity, turning her suffering into this project of self-analysis.
And this is the period that birthed her signature style. Her first major piece, Self-Portrait in a Velvet Dress, which she painted in 1926. It already has that direct, penetrating, unflinching gaze that would define her work.
It was a firm assertion of presence, of identity, staring back at the world from her place of forced isolation.
Okay, so from that bedroom, from that mirror, let's move into the 1930s, because this is where we see her grappling with how her intense personal pain starts to intersect with these massive external forces.
Yeah.
Political, cultural, industrial dislocation.
Yes. This happened particularly during the year she spent in the United States when she was accompanying Diego Rivera while he was working on these major mural commissions.
And she felt profoundly alienated in the U.S., didn't she? Especially in a city like Detroit, which was this hub of cold, hard industrialism.
Deeply alienated. And that cultural clash, that sense of not belonging, it produced some of her most harrowing and politically charged work. And a lot of it centered on reproductive trauma.
We absolutely have to look closely at Henry Ford Hospital from 1932.
This painting is, it might be one of the most clinically precise and brutally explicit depictions of miscarriage and reproductive grief in the entire history of art.
It leaves absolutely nothing to the imagination.
Nothing. Kahlo painted herself naked, completely isolated, bleeding on a hospital bed. And the bed itself seems to float incongruously above the dark industrial skyline of Detroit. You see the cold factories, the smoke, the sharp buildings in the distance.
And the real power of the piece, for me, comes from the symbolic objects. Each one is connected to her body by these red, ribbon-like umbilical cords.
Yes, there are 6 of them, and the detail in each one is just agonizing.
Let's walk through them.
Well, you see the male fetus, which is rendered with this chilling precision. It was actually based on medical illustrations she studied.
So it's clinical, not sentimentalized.
Not at all. Then there's an orchid, a traditional symbol, but here it's meant to represent the exposed female anatomy. You have a snail, which symbolizes the excruciating slowness of the ordeal she was going through.
The waiting.
The endless waiting. Then there's a medical apparatus, representing the cold, dehumanizing mechanization of modern medicine. And finally, the most direct symbols. The specific images of her own fractured pelvis bone and her damaged torso.
And I think we need to pause here and just acknowledge the truly stark irony of Fridamania when you look at this specific painting. This work, which is a document of brutal reproductive grief and bodily failure, a subject that our society typically demands we keep secret. It's now completely sanitized and sold as stationery, as notebooks.
It's unbelievable. I've even seen prints of it intended for children's bedrooms. The same society that often censors any real discussion of abortion or miscarriage simultaneously takes a woman's exposed clinical political statement of that grief and turns it into an object of consumer empowerment.
It's wild. She was using medical imagery as a deliberate political provocation, forcing us to confront the reality of the female body.
And the market just converts the image into decorative trauma.
And she followed this up with another really searing critique of American capitalism in the neighborhood. My Dress hangs there, painted in 1933. What's so remarkable about this piece is that Kahlo, the quintessential self-portraitist, chose to paint no self-portrait. Her body is consciously, conspicuously absent.
It's a total indictment through absence. Instead of her body, she suspends her traditional, vibrant Tijuana dress, her symbol of Mexican identity and resistance, right in the middle of this dense, chaotic cityscape.
It's almost like a collage.
It really is. The American landscape is this crushing medley of factories, skyscrapers, a church, the financial heart of Wall Street, and pointedly, explicitly at the bottom, there's a filthy public toilet.
So what's the core message she's delivering here?
Well, the message is undeniably clear. Her real, messy, Mexican, indigenous, female, disabled body had no place in this mechanized, cold, spiritually bankrupt world.
A world of pollution, finance, false piety.
Exactly. And only the empty clothing, just the symbol of her identity and her politics, could even momentarily occupy that space without being consumed or destroyed by it. The emptiness of that dress just speaks volumes about the hollowness of the American dream that she was observing.
And that political statement about identity and belonging, it flows directly into her most intense explorations of duality, of self-representation, and of, well, the utterly toxic relationship she shared with Diego Rivera. Which brings us to the two Fridas from 1939.
This is arguably her most famous exploration of split identity, and it was painted precisely during the period of her first divorce from Rivera. It's a masterful emotional synthesis. You have 2 versions of Frida, seated side by side, their hands are clasped tightly, but they're connected not just psychologically, they're connected by a single prominent vein, a biological link.
Let's dissect that duality. On one side, you have the Frida dressed in a European Victorian wedding dress. White, former, representing her European ancestry, maybe, perhaps the version of herself that Rivera rejected.
And crucially, her exposed heart on that side is broken. It's actively bleeding, and there are surgical forceps trying and failing to staunch the blood that's dripping onto the white lace.
It's such a brutal image.
And then contrasted with her is the Frida in the traditional, vibrant Tijuana attire. This represents her Mexican, her indigenous heritage. The version of her identity that she's so powerfully embraced. And her heart is intact, it's whole. And in her hand, she's holding a tiny miniature portrait of Diego Rivera, suggesting this is the part of her that's still connected to him.
The interpretations are endless, right? People say the conflict of her mixed German-Mexican heritage, the idealized self versus the wounded self, or even that she's returning to a childhood imaginary friend for comfort.
But the true power, I think, the analytical depth of the painting, lies in its refusal to give you a simple answer. It's not an either situation. That vein, that connection, ensures that this is a simultaneous, delacerating existence.
So the trauma and the love are happening at the exact same time.
Within the same person. It's the pain of being unable to resolve these two conflicting identities. You have to live with both.
And the anatomical rendering is so significant. These aren't, cartoon hearts from a Valentine.
No, not at all. They are anatomically precise, exposed organs. They're connected by veins that wind around them like something from a medical diagram. And that's deliberate. It's to emphasize that this profound emotional and psychological pain is also a physical reality. It's a wound that actually bleeds. The blood on the white lace is it's an agonizing detail.
Okay, so let's get into the relationship that drove this complexity, their marriage. It was famously dubbed the elephant and the dove by her parents. Because of the 20-year age gap, the stark difference in their physical size. She was just 22, he was 42, when they married in 1929. And it was defined by obsession and, frankly, mutual cruelty from the start.
Yeah, absolutely. Rivera was notoriously unfaithful from the very beginning, and this led to years of mutual infidelity on Kahlo's part as well, including high-profile affairs with the sculptor Isamu Noguchi and with numerous women.
But the real emotional shatter point for Kahlo, the one that really changed everything, came between 1934 and 1935.
Yes, that's when Rivera began an affair with her younger sister, Cristina.
That betrayal was just immense. She moved out, she sought a divorce. It became the benchmark for all future emotional trauma in her life. It led to that famous portrait, Memory of the Heart, from 1937, which showed this massive, gaping hole where her heart should be.
And yet, despite the divorce in 1939, they were just unable to break the cycle. They remarried in 1940 in San Francisco. They tried to set new, autonomous terms, separate social circles, financial independence. But the foundational obsession and the infidelities, they just persisted. The toxicity was complete.
And she chronicled it relentlessly in her art.
Yes. That tormented obsession really culminates visually in the 1949 self-portrait, Diego and I. And this work was painted specifically when Rivera was engaged in a very public, very high-profile affair with the famous film star Maria Felix, who, bitterly, was also one of Kahlo's close friends.
The visual devastation in that painting is immediate and total. Diego's face is literally painted onto her forehead. It's like he's occupying her mind completely, eclipsing her own consciousness, her own identity.
And her long, dark hair is depicted wrapping around her neck like a strangling vine, suggesting suffocation, constriction. And Diego is given this mysterious third eye, suggesting an acuity or an oppressive ability to see and dominate her internal life.
So what does the market tell us about the power of this psychological wound?
That the obsession, that the pain it sells. Diego and I captured that tormented fixation so perfectly that it sold for $34.9 million in 2021.
Wow.
And if you look at her diary entries from that time, they just capture the raw, immediate despair. She writes, "Diego, I am alone." And then later, unable to sustain it, she writes, "My Diego, I am no longer alone. You accompany me." That high valuation proves that the market understands the compelling narrative of toxic love, even if it completely ignores her politics.
Okay, so as her career progresses and her physical suffering just intensifies in the 1940s, she starts to move away from documenting specific biographical events. She begins to develop this incredibly complex symbolic language.
She does. She starts drawing from all these disparate sources to process her chronic suffering and transform her intense personal agony into a universal imagery of endurance.
A prime, really visceral example of this is the broken column, which she painted in 1944 after yet another catastrophic spinal surgery. This is where she really transforms her body into an architectural ruin.
Precisely. She shows her torso split dramatically wide open, and it reveals not a spine, but a crumbling, deteriorating ionic column in its place. A classical pillar, a symbol of strength, now fragmented.
And her entire body is pierced by dozens of nails.
Which is a clear and immediate visual reference to Christian martyrdom, specifically Saint Sebastian.
And all of this fragility is held together by this tight, restrictive steel orthopedic corset, which was one of many she had to wear throughout her life.
And yet, even with tears streaming down her face, she stands upright. She faces you, the viewer, unflinchingly. And she's positioned in this barren, fissured landscape that just mirrors the fragmentation of her own body.
The symbolism of the column itself has been so deeply analyzed, right? The way it penetrates vertically from her loins to her chin.
Yes, scholars have interpreted it as linking themes of sex, phallic imagery, and chronic pain all within her consciousness. But the overriding theme is endurance. It's about standing firm despite being fundamentally broken. It's about bearing the pain, not overcoming it in some kind of triumphant sense.
And we see a similar strategy of displacement, a way of externalizing pain without denying it, in The Wounded Deer from 1946.
In that painting, she grafts her recognizable human face onto the body of a vulnerable deer. The deer is pierced by 9 arrows. It's bleeding profusely as it flees through a dark, dense forest. It's a remarkable technique.
So she's displacing the injury onto an animal.
Exactly. She externalizes the physical trauma, but she still claims ownership of the psychological and emotional suffering through her distinct, knowing eyes that peer out from that animal body.
She built this profound symbolic vocabulary, this kind of mashup of Mexican and European sources to communicate this interior life.
She drew deeply from Catholic iconography, the complex cosmology of Aztec mythology, traditional Mexican folk art, and then she just invented her own symbolic language on top of it all.
Her animals, for instance, are never just incidental decorations.
Never. The monkeys, which were often gifts from Rivera, they functioned paradoxically. They were protectors, but also fertility symbol stand-ins for the children she tragically could not have.
And hummingbirds.
Hummingbirds in Aztec tradition were messengers between life and death, and in folk tradition, they were often seen as good luck charms for love.
So a dead hummingbird.
A dead hummingbird becomes this devastating symbol of extinguished romantic hopes. And then you have black cats for ill fortune or omens, and the deer for vulnerability and sacrifice.
So to connect all these symbols, let's look at Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird from 1940. It was painted immediately after her divorce from Rivera, and it's an almost perfect symbolic distillation of pain and stubborn hope.
The visual is so immediate and arresting. The thorn necklace is visibly piercing her neck, it's drawing blood, and the dead hummingbird is hanging from it like a pendant.
The messenger is dead.
The messenger is dead. Her romantic hopes have been utterly extinguished. And you see the black cat lurking over her shoulder, the omen of ill fortune. Meanwhile, the monkey, representing her turbulent connection to Rivera, is tugging at the painful thorns, compounding the agony.
You can't ignore the religious context here. The thorn necklace is a direct reference to Christ's crown of thorns. She's positioning herself as a secular martyr.
But here is the crucial difference.
Yeah.
In her work, there is no narrative of redemption. There's no soaring triumph at the end. The source material we reviewed notes that this work is simply the stark presentation of ongoing pain alongside stubborn, inexplicable hope.
It's a perpetual state of being.
It is. And if you look at the tradition of Mexican folk art, specifically the ex voto paintings, those little devotional paintings offered to a saint as thanks for a miracle, Kahlo subverts that entire tradition. She is offering her pain as a public devotion, but the miracle is that she survived. Not that she was healed. The pain is the miracle.
Okay, we now have to pivot to the area of her life that is most aggressively, most completely erased by the merchandise machine. And that's her radical, lifelong political commitment. This is where the comfortable narrative of the strong woman just completely falls apart.
Because she was an intellectual, a committed communist, and an anti-capitalist critic, her politics were absolutely foundational to her identity. They were not performative aesthetic choices. She joined the Mexican Communist Party in 1927, in a period defined by intense geopolitical struggle and rising U.S. economic influence in Mexico. This was an active and very risky stance to take.
And even her most recognizable aesthetic choice, the famous adoption of the traditional Tejana dress, was fundamentally political. It gets misinterpreted so often as something she did just to please Diego Rivera, or that it was simply an aesthetic preference.
And that misinterpretation is a form of cultural erasure. wearing the Tijuana dress, which is associated with the Zapotec women of Oaxaca and their powerful matriarchal society. That was a deliberate political statement of anti-colonialism. It was a visible solidarity with indigenous Mexico, a rejection of European cultural domination.
And a powerful assertion of her own mestizo identity.
Exactly. And we now know from photographs that her own mother wore this style, so her connection to it predated her marriage to Rivera entirely.
Her revolutionary connections were deep, and frankly, they were dangerous. When Leon Trotsky needed asylum from Stalin in 1937, it was Kahlo and Rivera who hosted him at the Casa Azul.
Yes, they were temporarily aligned with Trotskyism at that point, having broken with Stalin's faction. And Kahlo even engaged in a brief affair with Trotsky during that time.
Which just highlights the volatile nature of her political commitment. She was active, engaged, and willing to risk her safety for her beliefs.
But the political climate shifted so rapidly. By 1939, both she and Rivera had swung back to supporting Stalinism. And the seriousness of these affiliations was really underscored in 1940 when Trotsky was assassinated in Mexico City. Kahlo was briefly arrested as a suspect.
And she never retreated from this commitment. In fact, her communist imagery only intensified in her final painful years. It really culminates in what you can consider her final political testament.
Which is the painting Marxism will give health to the sick, from 1954, just before she died. I mean, the title alone tells you everything you need to know about the lack of subtlety.
Right. Let's analyze the visuals. She paints herself discarding her crutches, which symbolize her lifelong physical suffering. She's clutching a red book, the symbol of communist ideology, and she's being supported by these two giant disembodied hands, which are explicit communist symbols of solidarity and collective action.
And above her head, Karl Marx's bearded face is hovering like a benevolent guiding sun.
And in the corner.
And in the lower right corner, the image of American imperialism is explicitly condemned. And Uncle Sam Vulture is strangled. This wasn't a vague political statement. It was an explicit ideological commitment written right onto the canvas.
And the full original title, which often gets shortened, absolutely drives a point home.
It was. Peace on Earth so the Marxist science may save the sick and those oppressed by criminal Yankee capitalism.
Wow. She was physically destroyed, but politically she was completely and utterly uncompromising to the very end.
That commitment was honored at the time of her death. When she died on July 13, 1954, a communist hammer and sickle was deliberately draped over her casket during her public viewing at the Palace of Fine Arts. And that was a choice that reflected her core, unwavering belief that her intensely personal, private suffering was fundamentally connected to broader systems of capitalist exploitation and imperial aggression. To ignore her communism is to fundamentally ignore her central identity.
Okay, so now we take this radical, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist artist whose final painting explicitly condemns criminal Yankee capitalism, and we bring her crashing into the global luxury art market of 2025. The irony isn't just profound, it's a form of visual violence.
Her market dominance today is nothing short of astonishing. It's a testament to the power of her image as a commodity. We have to discuss the record sale from November of 2025. Her 1940 self-portrait, El Sueño, La Cama, The Dream, The Bed, sold for a staggering $54.7 million at Sotheby's in New York.
Let's just sit with that figure for a moment. Contextually, what does that mean? That single sale shattered the auction record for works by female artists globally. It eclipsed Georgia O'Keeffe's previous record of $44.4 million. It also instantly made Kahlo the most expensive Latin American artist ever sold at auction, cementing her market position as a global blue-chip investment.
And here's where the market dynamics become almost surreal. That very same painting. It previously sold for only $51,000 back in 1980.
$51,000.
$51,000. That represents a 1,000-fold increase in value over 45 years. This valuation surge demonstrates the explosive, almost irrational growth of Fridamania as a global luxury commodity.
But wait, I have to pose a critical challenge here. If her work is now commanding over $50 million, isn't there an argument to be made that this extreme visibility, this valuation, even if it's ironic, it keeps her work and her political message, however sanitized, in the public eye? I mean, does total obscurity serve her message better than hyper-commodification?
That is the essential tension, isn't it? On one hand, yes, the visibility is undeniable. On the other hand, the valuation dictates who gets to own the legacy. What that $54 million price tag buys is not just a painting, it buys the right to remove her art from the public sphere. Private collectors have no obligation to honor her political message.
So the high price simultaneously celebrates her fame while restricting access to her actual work.
Exactly. It turns her socialist dreams into a trophy for the very capitalism she condemned.
And beneath this veneer of glamour and record-breaking sales, there is a deeply troubling contradiction, which was highlighted by the scandal that erupted in April of 2025. These explosive allegations of missing works from her official museum collection in Mexico.
This scandal speaks directly to the violence of the market. Hilda Trujillo Soto, who was the director of the Museo Frida Kahlo, the Casa Azul, for 18 years, she published these explosive claims. She alleged that a significant number of works have simply disappeared from the collection that was bequeathed to the Mexican nation.
The specifics are horrifying. At least 2 original oil paintings, 8 drawings, and critically, 6 pages from her intimate, posthumously published diary are alleged to be missing.
And those diary pages, which date from March 1953, they allegedly vanished sometime after 2003 when the diary was taken off public display and put into a safe for preservation.
This isn't just about internal negligence. This is a massive cultural loss.
A leading Kahlo scholar confirmed awareness of the missing works, publicly calling the situation a scandal of epic proportions. And the most disturbing part connects directly back to her critique of Yankee capitalism. There are allegations suggesting some of these pieces were sold illegally through U.S. auction houses and galleries.
So this is a clear case of potential cultural patrimony trafficking. Because Mexican law is explicit, Rivera's bequest donated Casa Azul and its entire contents to the nation of Mexico in perpetuity. Her works are legally artistic monuments of the nation. Their export is banned.
Yet, some of the allegedly missing pieces were tracked to a gallery in New York, Marianne Martin Fine Art, and the gallery's Kahlo inventory was quickly removed from their website after the allegations surfaced. Now, the trust managing Casa Azul, which is administered by the Bank of Mexico, has officially disputed these claims as unfounded, but the shadow of international art trafficking remains.
The irony is just chilling. The anti-capitalist artist, whose final work explicitly critiqued criminal Yankee capitalism, now has pieces of her cultural heritage allegedly stolen and trafficked across borders to feed the exact global luxury market she despised.
And this highlights the dual legacy source we have. The Casa Azul, that beautiful cobalt blue house in Coyoacan, that was her birthplace, her lifelong home, and the place where she died. It remains the essential source of her legacy, drawing about 25,000 visitors every month.
Rivera donated the house and all of its intimate contents, her studio, her bed with a mirror, her medical corsets. He donated all of it to the nation in 1957. But even this legacy is now being contested, with new attempts to control her narrative.
And that's the controversy around the Casa Roja, or the Red House, which opened in September 2025. It houses belongings from her extended family. And while it adds context, it's also sparked controversy over the authenticity of some materials and its relationship to the official, federally recognized Casa Azul legacy. It just underscores the ongoing battle over who controls the story of Frida Kahlo.
Okay, so for you, our listener, who wants to be truly well-informed about Frida Kahlo beyond the superficial brand, approaching her work today requires a kind of deliberate unlearning. We've analyzed the source material to give you 5 actionable strategies for a deeper engagement.
Strategy 1. Remember scale and intimacy. The image you see on a billboard or a poster is a complete distortion. Most of her paintings are small. Many are roughly the size of a laptop screen, or even smaller. They were never meant for large public display.
They demand close, quiet viewing, like you're examining an intimate diary or a votive offering. When they're blown up to poster size, they lose that essential context of vulnerability and intimacy. They become graphic, sure, but they cease to be delicate.
Strategy 2. Resist narratives of overcoming. This is the hardest battle against the pop culture version of Frida. Her paintings offer no easy resolution, no linear path to healing, and no redemption narrative. They present ongoing, simultaneous suffering and contradiction.
We have to resist the pressure to flatten the complex, messy, and chronic reality of a disabled artist's work into just inspirational quotes. Her art demands that we acknowledge that some pain simply endures, and it doesn't always have a purpose.
Strategy 3. Study the uncomfortable details. Look past the flowers and the eyebrows and zoom in on the specific elements we've talked about. The blood, the exposed organs, the cicatrices, the scars, the restrictive medical devices, and the explicit communist symbols.
These elements are not decorative choices. They weren't designed to be aesthetically pleasing. They are deliberate provocations. They're designed specifically to disturb your gaze and to challenge the societal expectation that marginalized subjects should only represent themselves in ways that are easily palatable. She wasn't trying to make beauty. She was trying to force us to look at what we'd rather ignore.
Strategy 4. Interrogate your own consumption. When you encounter her image on a product, a t-shirt, a mug, a makeup collaboration, ask yourself some critical questions. Why do I like this specific image? What part of the story does this convenient image ignore? Who ultimately profits from this merchandise?
And most pointedly, would Kahlo, the lifelong communist who explicitly critiqued American capitalism and exploitation, would she approve of her face and her pain being turned into a mass-market commodity? It forces a confrontation between the art and the market.
And finally, strategy 5. Contextualize the politics. It must be repeated. She was not a generic contemporary feminist icon in the modern liberal sense. She was a Mexican communist who explicitly critiqued American imperialism and envisioned collective liberation through Marxism. Divorcing her art from those foundational, structural, and lifelong political commitments is a fundamental form of erasure.
So the ultimate uncomfortable truth about Frida Kahlo is that her entire body of work was designed to be difficult. It was created to resist easy assimilation and to force you, the viewer, into a direct confrontation with the realities that society consistently tries to hide. Pain without purpose, bodies that don't heal, love that destroys, and uncompromised revolutionary political rage.
We have to stop trying to use Kahlo to illustrate these prepackaged slogans about resilience or empowerment. Instead, we have to allow her paintings to do what they were intended to do, to destabilize our comfortable narratives, to shatter the myth of triumph, and to remind us forcefully that identity, body, and politics are fundamentally things that bleed. The rest, the mugs, the sanitized biographies, the art trafficking, it's merely commerce built on a life that actively resisted being reduced.
What we choose to remember and amplify about Frida Kahlo reveals far more about our own cultural priorities than it does about the artist herself. It reveals what we're willing to see about pain, about power, and about what it means to make art from the actual wreckage of a life.
So the final provocation for you then is not about the aesthetic image of Frida on our t-shirts. It's whether we, the consumers, are brave enough to sit with the discomfort her actual bloody political paintings demand. Are we truly prepared to look honestly at the thorns and the communist symbols? Or do we prefer the comfortable, consumable image that allows us to look away? That is the challenge her magnificent, complex, and painful legacy places before all of us.